Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Just want to thank Harley and the whole team for asking me to speak here today. It's a real honor to talk to all of you. And I'm a neuropsychologist on the Healthy Brain Aging team, so I'm going to try and give you an update of what we've been up to in the last year or so. And these are things that I try to do for myself as I'm aging, and I hope I can encourage all of you to think of one or two things that you can do once you've left here today as well. So first, what is typical cognitive aging? This is a really difficult question on an individual basis, but as a group, these are real data that show the development of cognition over age, and we see that we have rapid gains in cognition in childhood. They kind of peak around age 30 or so and show gradual but measurable decline with increasing age. And you can see if that green line there is considered average, that a typical cognitive ager kind of hovers right around average. And this is a big divergence from what we consider a neurodegenerative trajectory. So that would be the red line there that takes a much steeper decline in older age. And if that dotted red line there indicates impairment, you can see that the neurodegenerative trajectory crosses that impairment line, whereas the typical ager blue line does not cross that impairment line. So that's sort of the big differentiator there. And as part of the Healthy Aging team, we're really interested in this sort of juncture here, where we can potentially prevent some of that red line and promote more of the blue line. And so if you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm on whatever trajectory I'm on, I'm here to hopefully tell you that that might not be the case. In fact, our team, led by Christine Yaffe, has shown that up to a third of dementia cases are attributable to modifiable risk factors. Luckily, Robbie the Brain has done my job for me, but I'm going to touch on some of these in a little bit more detail. So vascular disease, what is good for the heart is good for the brain. That's basically the take-home message there. I'll talk about physical and cognitive activity as well as diet. I don't have time to talk about mood and stress, but we know that these are factors, loneliness, stress, low mood, are all risk factors for cognitive decline with age. I'm happy to chat about those things if people have specific questions later. So vascular disease, why am I talking about the vasculature? Hopefully this model of the brain up here tells you why. We have incredibly intricate arteries and veins and capillaries that traverse throughout our brain. So you can imagine anything that blocks or occludes or damages one of these vessels in the brain will have a really bad downstream effects on that area of the brain. And so we know actually that all of these factors listed here, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, smoking, things that are bad for our vasculature, each of those have been associated with worse brain health as we get older. And in particular, they seem to cause these little white spots on the brain, and that's an indicator to us, these are not normal, that there's been some vascular damage to the brain area. And each of these factors, increases as we get older. We're just more susceptible to high cholesterol and high blood pressure. So as part of the Healthy Aging team, we're really interested in what's going on there, what might be driving these factors. And so I'm just going to highlight a little bit of the work that's been going on. So this is led by Cutter Lindberg, you just saw. So he measured inflammation peripherally, so just a marker of inflammation in the blood. And he found that as, this is a longitudinal study in our healthy agers, that as inflammation increased over time, there was more of these white spots in people's brains, more of this white matter injury. And not only that, but as inflammation increased over time, there was an exponential decrease in the gray matter tissue in these people's brains. And these are typical cognitive agers. So inflammation of the vasculature seems to be really important. And then also Adam Stefaroni has some work looking actually at the blood flow to the brain itself using a brain MRI. And he showed that, again, a longitudinal in our Healthy Aging team, over time, as people had less blood flow to the brain, they again had more of these white spots popping up in their brain, more white matter injury. As well as less blood flow to the brain, they had more cognitive slowing. So this is really important for folks' cognition, again, even in the typical aging cohort. So the vasculature, really important for our brain as we get older, even if we're just sort of typically aging. And that sort of segues nicely into the work that we do in physical activity. So we know that physical activity is better for the brain. There's been some recent sort of meta-analysis review studies of all the clinical trials that have gone on in exercise that have demonstrated that basically any type of physical activity is good for cognition as long as it's sort of moderate intensity, about 45 minutes per session, but really of any frequency. It seems to be good for cognition. The American College of Sports Medicine recommends about 150 minutes a week, about 2.5 hours. And so we all know, physical activity is good for our bodies, and I'm here to sort of suggest that it's really specifically good for our brains directly. So I'm going to highlight kind of a cool experiment that I think that's been going on for the last year in collaboration with Saul Vieda's group. He's a molecular neuroscientist here, and his student, Alana Horowitz. So just give me a moment to walk you through this experiment. So he works with mice. So what he did was he took some old mice, he had them exercise, and he basically found that there are more new neurons that pop up in the brains of mice that exercise. Pretty cool. That's actually been shown before, but great to see again. But he's really interested in what's going on here with exercise and new neurons in the hippocampus, the memory centers of the brain. So then what he did is he took old mice, he just had them hang out, and he injected them with the blood of other mice who had run. So he injected them with exercise blood. Kind of wild. And he found that actually, even just injecting these old mice with exercise blood, those mice also had a bunch of new neurons popping up in their hippocampus as well. So sort of recapitulating the effect of exercise just through blood. And so then the question was, well, what is it about the blood in animals that exercise that's good for the brain? So he took old mice and young mice, he exercised them, he took all of their blood, he pooled it together, he figured out there are about 12 factors that were upregulated in the blood of mice who exercise. What he did was he took this one factor, he injected it into old mice just to see what does this one factor in the blood do. And he found, wow, even with this one factor injected into old mice who are just hanging out, he could also recapitulate more new neurons growing in the brain. Pretty wild. And so as the healthy aging team, I think it's great to find these novel, cool factors in animals, but we were wondering, how does this work in humans? Is this even important to us? And so anyone who's participated in our Fitbit study, thank you. We took your blood and we gave it to Saul. And we asked the question, in people who have more activity in their everyday lives, do they also have upregulation of this protein? And we found, yes, indeed, that folks out here who have participated in our Fitbit study, they had more of this factor upregulated in their blood. So I'm hoping to come back next year with sort of exercise in a bottle that I can give you guys. But until then, we're just going to try and work out the mechanisms of what's been going on here. This is ongoing work. And I just want to highlight one other project that we've been doing on physical activity. This is led by Karen Dorsman, who is around here somewhere, so you can ask her questions. So she had the question of, in our healthy aging folks, longitudinally as exercise changes, how does this change the brain networks that develop over time? And she found that older adults who increase their physical activity over time had increasing connectivity of their brain networks over time. And what's really interesting about this study is she found that it wasn't folks' overall levels of physical activity, it was only those who showed increasing levels of activity that had these increasing sort of synchrony of their brain networks. So the message here being it's never too late, we can all increase our activity, change our lifestyle, and change our brains. And now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about cognitive activity. So I think sort of the state of the science in this area, brain training, I think we've done a good job of showing that if we train the brain to do a certain skill, it will learn that skill. And there's actually probably some durability to that ability. So this, I still think, is one of the best studies of brain training that's out there. So they took older adults, they trained them on processing speed or reasoning training, and they found they got better at that skill. And not only that, they had them come back 10 years later, and they found that those who had done the training were still performing better than those who hadn't. So again, this sort of proof of principle that we can train our brain. And we're really interested in kind of the biology of what's going on there. How do we figure out how to engage our brain mentally? So this is work led by Nina Ducic, who's one of our research coordinators. Also here, you can find her. And she found that the amount of leisure activities that people engage in our healthy aging cohort moderates the effect of amyloid on functioning. So basically, she found that. So again, amyloid is one of the bad proteins that misfolds in Alzheimer's disease. These are in our typical ager group. So our healthy aging people who had more amyloid in their brain those that had a high amount of leisure activities performed better on memory testing than their peers who did not have high activity levels. And she found that this was independent of quality of education or premorbid abilities, as well as independent of the caloric expenditure related to that activity. So it seems to be really specific to cognitive stimulation of these activities, potentially independent of amyloid protein aggregation as well. And if I haven't convinced you fully enough to get active, that active lifestyles are important, I'll highlight one last piece of work that we've been working on in the last year. So this is in our group of genetic gene carriers for frontotemporal dementia. So these folks are carriers for autosomal dominant frontotemporal dementia, meaning that they will get the disease at some point in their life if they live long enough. And so our question was, how does lifestyle impact the trajectory of people who are going to get this disease? And in fact, we found that gene carriers who had more physical and cognitive activity at baseline showed about 60% less functional decline per year than their peers who were less active. And not only that, but we found that among those who had some atrophy in their brain, so they were having some brain changes, so those who had higher physical and cognitive activity performed better for their brain atrophy than their peers who did not have that atrophy. So they're performing better on our testing than we would expect given their brain atrophy, kind of outperforming their brains. So hopefully this really provides that proof of principle that we can change our trajectories just using lifestyle, even if we are predisposed to certain directions. And so I'm just going to try and head off some of the questions that I know I'm going to get at the end. So I think physical activity is a little bit more straightforward, but cognitive activity is a little bit more nebulous. How do I do this in my everyday life? Should I buy a brain training program? I think the take-home message here is brain training programs are an excellent research tool. It's a way that we can dose out a certain amount of cognitive activity. They show the proof of principle that we can train the brain. I don't know that the data are there yet to say that it's going to prevent you from getting Alzheimer's disease. If it's something that you enjoy and you have the money for, I think it's absolutely safe and appropriate and fine. But more so, I think the characteristics of our mental stimulation is important. More and more data show that it's probably important that these activities are novel and challenging. So once your brain makes a connection, it's pretty much there. So we want to develop new connections, more complex connections in our brain. And in order to do that, we need to challenge our brain. And so those are the characteristics that you're looking for. It's going to be individual specific. And you can think about that for yourself. But there's so many forms of this, and so many of them are free. So you can do things like we've already heard, hanging out with your family and friends, learning new languages, volunteering, new hobbies, or if you like computer games, brain training, go for it. And in my last couple of minutes, I'm just going to talk a little bit about diet. This is a really complex field, but it's definitely emerging as an important factor as we get older. So the Mediterranean style diet is something that I think more and more data has shown is actually quite good for the brain. So what is this diet? It's really, the idea is to base your meal on the vegetable and the legumes and the whole grains, and then build your proteins on top of that. And the major protein group is seafood and fish, and some poultry and red meats less often. The idea of using olive oil versus butter, drinking a little bit of wine in moderation, red wine in moderation, and being sort of physically and socially active, having this meal with family and friends. And that's really the idea behind the Mediterranean diet. And I'll just show you some cool data that was led by Emily Fox, who is a research coordinator who has left us for graduate school. So she was curious, again, in our healthy aging group, all you folks who have participated. So those who reported adhering to more of a Mediterranean-style diet, how did that affect their brain health? And she found, again, healthy aging group, that those who adhere to more of a Mediterranean style had fewer of these amyloid plaques in their brain. They reported fewer depressive symptoms, and they actually performed better on our memory testing over time. So again, healthy agers who adhere to more of a Mediterranean-style diet had fewer sort of Alzheimer's-like symptoms in our group. So I think this is a really exciting area that we're hoping to pursue further. So the major take-home, challenge your brain, support it with all the nutrients that you can, being here at events like you are today, interacting with each other and with all the teams here. This is all really good for your brain, so great job today. And I just want to give a plug for a couple of ongoing studies. So we have more. We're still doing our Fitbit Healthy Aging study. So if you want to sort of be a part of us trying to find out new novel factors to figure out how to give you exercise in a bottle next year, please come and participate. We also have an intervention study looking at if we modify lifestyle, what happens to the brain. It's called ACTAN. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out to me or Nina. We have some flyers out front. And I just want to thank everyone here. You know, you are the reason I have a job. You're the reason I'm allowed to come in and learn every day, and I get paid to do it. And it's a really incredible job. So thank you all for all the work that you do. And a huge thank you. Hopefully I highlighted that this is really a team effort, the Healthy Aging Network, and it's all led by our captain, Joel Kramer. So, you know, without him, this team would not be here, and I, again, wouldn't have a job. So thank you to everyone who's a part of this work.